I'm going to turn this over to Charlie Rivkin, who is a dear friend of SYA's. Came from the great place in Chicago with Carl Moore and a number of other folks, and there's great stories about how that started. But Charlie has spent his life connected to the greater world, was the U.S. ambassador to France, is now head of the Motion Pictures Association, had to endure a long plane ride from Washington, D.C. last night out here, and we'll be back there. And he's also been a winner of the Distinguished Alum Award of SYA, and there's no better person to represent us, and I thank him for being here tonight.
You know, it's been said that if you change one life, you change the world. Well, think about how many lives Thomas Hassan is changing by being the president of SYA. Can we get a round of applause for Mr. Hassan? Just incredible. And it's fun to be back with high school friends and people in the industry here in Los Angeles. I miss being here. I'll take the rain over the Washington snow any day. More importantly, here with Cheo and Melora Hardin. And we're going to talk to them in a second. I want to say about Cheo, which I think everybody knows these people, so it's sort of redundant for me to give introductions, but the creator of this enormous, and I mean enormous, and you'll hear about it, Netflix hit Luke Cage, which has taken the world by storm. Co-producer and biopic, of Notorious B.I.G., writer-producer Southland, Ray Donovan, co-writer on Creed 2, which is an amazing movie, really fantastic. Straight Outta Compton, NCIS LA, the list goes on. You can't get anybody more influential or more important in this industry. It's an honor to share the stage. And likewise with Melora Hardin. And Cheo, you're an SYA alum, right? And Melora is an SYA parent, and we're going to hear about that in a few minutes as well. But my God, actor, dancer, singer, filmmaker, everybody knows you from The Office as Steve Carell's ex-boss and sort of awkward love interest. Transparent, which is one of the greatest shows I think ever made on I won't even say television, but made. Tammy Cashman, nominated for an Emmy Award. Your credits, I hear there are over 70 different movie and TV credits. I can't begin to list them all. I will say that Monk and The Bold Type, though, are two of my favorites. So you'll be hearing from these people in a few seconds. I just wanted to start off by telling two stories, and I'm going to ask these panelists to do the same. The first is what SYA meant to me and what it means to you and your families. And the second is the topic of tonight, which is the role of media as it relates to global issues. So in terms of SYA, SYA was transformative for me. I got along very well with my French family. In fact, when I was ambassador to France, I had the chance to invite them, the La Famille Gervais, to the residence of the ambassador for 4th of July. And I'll never forget. They were a little bit disappointed because they told me they expected me to be president, but I guess that's for another life. But it was still fun for me. And I wouldn't have been ambassador without my experience in SYA. And I wouldn't have done what I did as ambassador if it wasn't for my experience. An example of that is my French father was a very lovable man. He was, the best way I could describe it would be a fake blue jeans salesman. He sold blue jeans out of the trunk of his car, and we were living in a wonderful, modest house in the suburbs of Rennes, and he asked if I would go with him on spring trip where he was doing a sales trip from west of France in Rennes all the way to Besançon, which is near the Swiss Alps, and we cut across the country. And I learned the concept, as some of you from the SYA France will know, of terroir, which is not just the earth, it's the culture of a region, the history of a region, what makes the region important. And when I was ambassador, I was the first ambassador in history to visit all 22 regions of France and recognize that this isn't about America's representation in Paris, it's about our representation to our oldest friend and ally. And then when I was, the second topic, and then I'll quickly get to these guests, about how media relates to global issues. I'll tell a first-hand story about that. As a representative of the U.S. government, it's important not to be partisan. I believe it's a nonpartisan statement to say I was an Obama ambassador, but a nonpartisan statement was empirically, when I arrived, just before I arrived in France, America had an 11% approval rating because of the Iraq War. The day that Obama was sworn in, it rose to 88%. So I was very lucky that I came to France at the time of great goodwill. but I inherited a relationship that for 8 years was quite broken. And so I found in my life that it's easier to hate what you don't understand. And I wanted to go to what's called the banlieue, the suburbs of Paris that are largely Muslim and immigrant and unfortunately rather poor. No one has really visited those places before. I was advised against it. That's where the recent rioting sort of started. But I went there and I was talking to these kids, and they were complaining about the way the French government treated them. And I said, okay, well, let's just change the topic. What do you like about America? They say, America? We like Samuel Jackson and Will.i.am and Will Smith and Jodie Foster and Robert Redford, and this is what we like about America. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to come back here with some of these guys. And they said, Mr. Ambassadeur, langue de bois, which effectively means you have a wooden tongue because you're like all politicians. And I'm like, well, I'm not a politician, but thank you. In the category of it's better to be lucky than good, about a week later, Sam Jackson called me and he said, LaTanya and I are in town. Can we have lunch? And I go, not until you come with me to the banlieue. And so LaTanya made him get into this car because he didn't want to do it. But we got to a place called Villiers-le-Bel, and he's got his glasses on, armored vehicles, motorcycle escorts. We get out of the car, and these same kids start yelling, Big Mac, Big Mac, because for those of you who've seen Pulp Fiction, you'll know that was one of his famous lines. And
Le Big Mac.
Le Big Mac. And he gave them, honestly, it was really a tough love speech. But what he said, they go, Mr. Jackson, you know, I have no chance here in France. He goes, the American dream is the French dream. You should see what I did at the beginning of my career. You have to work your ass off, and then you can deserve the fruits of your labor and stop feeling sorry for yourself. He told this to these kids. I couldn't say that as an ambassador, but the impact that it had on them and on the French media was pretty extraordinary.
Did he use the MF word?
He did, and interestingly, the interpreters ignored it. But so what happened is I went back again with every single one of the people on the list, with Robert Redford, with Clint Eastwood, with Will Smith, Will.i.am, and even Woody Allen. And it was really amazing to watch the way this community, Hollywood, can serve as diplomats, because we have projected American power and American values around the world for over 100 years, and to actually live it and to watch the way media can impact foreign policy was fantastic to see firsthand. I joined the Jim Henson Company, which I had run for 15 years, and the man who ran it, Jim Henson, would always say, media, if used properly, could be an enormous source for good in the world. And I think I saw that personally when I was in town. So, with that in mind, I'd love to Cheo, let's start with you. First of all, and the first question to both of you guys, is talk about your experience either personally or with your family in SYA and how it might have impacted your view of the world or your outlook on things, or just what struck you the most in this experience?
I mean, to me, SYA was everything. I mean, it was the opportunity not only to go to Spain, but here's the thing was, my grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman. He flew with the 100th Fighter Squadron in the 302nd. And so my mom growing up, because, there were so many opportunities that before becoming an Air Force pilot, or back then it was Army Air Corps, but he stayed in. He was one of the rare people to fly combat in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. So he flew everything from the P-51 Mustang through the F-4. During some of the most tumultuous moments of the civil rights era of the 60s, he was a major in the Air Force living in Torrejon, at Torrejon Air Force Base. And so my mom has so many memories of Spain and Madrid and of La Casa de Botín, and this really already had a predisposition so that when I was at Hotchkiss as a scholarship student, and, growing up middle class, but not, but really impoverished compared to some of my classmates, and hearing about these fabulous vacations that they would go on, and just kind of feeling envious or feeling to a certain extent inferior from the standpoint of not having had the opportunity to go to some of these places. And then the opportunity to go to, abroad for a year, and people not really, SYA was an option, but it wasn't an option that a lot of people took. And so in taking that, but already being encouraged by my grandfather and my mom, like, when you go to another country, you learn so many things. It's worth the opportunity of doing it. And then getting over there, just the way it opens your eyes, and then it's just the little steps. And like, for example, you were talking about how people are now, students are just beginning to dream in the language. You have these little milestones. My milestone at first was getting people to not hang up the phone on me. Because if I was, with my host family and answered the phone, they could hear immediately that you weren't Spanish. And so when I got to the point where people didn't hang up the phone, or where I could have conversations, it's that step. Or when I first was over there, my little sister, Reina, she was 6 years old, actually a year younger than my daughter is. And she was my best friend because she was the only person that we were on the same level of speaking at the time. But what it does is that it gives you a certain confidence, and you begin not only exploring. In our case, we weren't in Zaragoza, we were in Barcelona. I use the Feifea because I can. But when you realize all of a sudden that, like, you're seeing a Spain that the students I was once envious of had never seen, and you have the opportunity to meet Spaniards, to understand the culture, understand the music, to talk about and argue about sports. Although Barca wasn't very good back then. It was all about Real Madrid, and so of course I'm very proud now that Barca clearly is the best Spanish, the best soccer team in the world. But the thing is that everything that you do every day is a learning experience. And it got to the point at Hotchkiss where it's just like, you're so overwhelmed and so beat down by all your classes that you need a change. And it was the confidence that I earned, just my enthusiasm for learning on a daily basis, that it was after coming back when I, made the honor roll. And the post-Barcelona student was the one that got into Stanford, Yale, UPenn, Columbia. Ultimately I chose Stanford. But when you talk about how it changes your life, it gives you so much confidence. And aunque 30 años todavía puedo hablar español. And that's the thing, being able to go into any room and know that even if I don't understand what people are saying, just having the confidence that I can find somebody that I can relate to. That's how it opens up your eyes, really. And I can only imagine, particularly now with these other campuses and the other languages that are being learned. I think the thing that makes a difference is that when a student is a graduate of SYA, it's not like you had said, you're not just a basically drive-through student. You become a native speaker, or it gives you at the very least the basis from which to blossom in that direction if you want, if you so choose. And I think that's really the main difference, is that it's just not a party trick. I mean, you really are learning a language, you are learning a culture, and now as a parent of 13-year-old twin boys and a 7-year-old daughter, I'm hoping that they have the opportunity to do SYA, because I think that it would change their lives the way that it changed mine.
Well, that's a perfect segue, actually, because I know my daughter did SYA summer school, and she loved that. She helped learned her French over summer. But Melora, your daughter is currently or just finished China?
No, currently.
Currently,
Yeah.
and so it's a little bit early to ask about life lessons and things like that. But what have you experienced on that topic? And how has she changed? Has she said anything that struck you since she's gone there?
Yeah, and also the earlier part of your question too was sort of why did we choose this? I would say absolutely she came home for Christmas for 10 days, and we have chosen Waldorf education for our children, so they've been in the Waldorf educational system since kindergarten, which is, for anyone that knows anything about Waldorf, couldn't be more different than the prep schools and the boarding schools that so many of these kids seem to come from. So I think for us, first of all, in Waldorf education, you start with one teacher and you go all the way through 8th grade with that teacher as your main lesson teacher. So the people that were at our Christmas party, was the day after she came back for Christmas, were standing around and they had little short conversations with her, and so many people came up to us and said, oh my God, she's been there 3 months and she's so different, she's so mature, she's so in her center, she's profoundly different. So these are people that, parents that have known her since she was 5. So that's first of all, just a pretty cool thing to hear as a parent. And I think in terms of why we were attracted to it, I think directly speaks to the world citizen part of this question and also about media, interestingly. My husband and I are both in the business, and he's English, and I'm American, and so he did a lot of traveling in Europe when he was a young man, and I actually backpacked through Europe when I was 18. I backpacked through Europe, for, just by myself, and I always sort of have said, if every high school graduate could get a plane ticket and a URail pass and see that the world is full of mostly good people, we would have world peace, So I think that's part of the impetus that that made us want to send Rory to China, because it really does do all the things you both have spoken about, and everybody here, the few people that we've had an opportunity to talk to, that it really does sort of, you sink into this experience. We learned about it through a friend who had sent her son there. And, she said that they live in the Upper West Side in New York City, and she said, he was living in a host family's house in China where, they would close the bathroom door and the entire bathroom, including the toilet and the sink, became the shower. So, and for him, that's so different than living in an Upper West Side, lifestyle. And he came back and he said, Mom, it's really cool because you can live lots of different ways and it can be really good. And I mean, just that kind of perspective, to be able to fly up 30,000 feet over your life and look down and see that you have your life wherever you live, but there's all these other people having their lives where they live, and that they're equally as interesting and equally as effective and loving. And so I think that was a big part of it. And then as far as the answer to the media part, or including the media part, our daughters are also actors and have worked professionally, and so I think both my husband and I kind of thought, there's not really anything wrong with going to a country where they put almost as much money into their movie industry as we do here in America. And to be a 6-foot-tall American girl who can speak fluent Mandarin, who has aspirations to be an actress. And that's a really interesting combination, which I think is going to happen more and more, is happening right here in America, and is going to happen more and more in China, because it has to, because that's what's happening in the world. We are all becoming so enmeshed. So that's, I don't know if that's...
Well, that is exactly right. And I want to come back to a couple other questions, but before I do, at the MPAA, I can say with certainty that China will be the largest film market in the world in short order. And they are dramatically ramping up, and our films, 8 films from the major studios did better in China than did in America last year alone, which is pretty extraordinary. Go ahead, please.
Oh, no, to your point about the world, I had direct experience with this with Luke Cage. The one thing, one thing I always said about Luke Cage was that if Marvel and Netflix knew that they were giving me the opportunity to run something so valuable, they wouldn't have given it to me. But I knew what made the show different was the fact that it wasn't the normal model where you write a pilot, you film the pilot, you show it to people, and you hope that you get picked up for, if you're lucky, a season. The thing was with, this isn't classified, so because Marvel, when I was working for them, very secret. I'm still looking for snipers around here. But the thing was that the shows, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, they were already ordered. I think each of them had the 13 episode first season, all of them guaranteed. So you knew telling the story that you were going to be able to tell 13 episodes, but the most important part was that they were going to open the show day and date around the world. And for one, it was just incredible. We did our junket in Paris, and so it was myself and Mahershala Ali, who played Cottonmouth, and Mike Coulter and Simone Missick, and Alfre Woodard. It was just incredible kind of, doing this deeply Black American hip-hop flavored show, and just seeing the response that we had in Paris. But then when it opened on September 30th, 2016, it was a day later that I didn't really experience the full impact of opening around the world, because we were the first Netflix, and so far the only Netflix show to actually break the service. Because so many people around the world were trying to watch Luke Cage at the same time that Netflix went dark for 2 hours. And so they're used to, and you've heard this parlance, they used to say with African American entertainment in terms of the world that black doesn't travel. Meaning that if you had, the reason that what they would do in terms of budgets is they would say, we're only going to give you $15 million to make your movie, Spike or John Singleton, because your movie's only going to make its money here. It's not going to make its money overseas. And it wasn't until the success of, Luke Cage, or it wasn't until Will Smith began traveling with his movies that it proved the opposite, that the world is hungry for any kind of, and of course Black Panther just took it to a whole different level. I mean, what it is that the world wants to experience cultures and different ways of saying things in music, and movies are still the best conveyor, or best way to do that. And so that's why, to your point, it's such an important opportunity to, here's the thing, it's like, I don't know the first thing about, Scotland or heroin, but Trainspotting is still one of my favorite movies, because it just puts you right in the middle of something. And then Danny Boyle did the same thing with his other movie, and just in terms of Bollywood culture. I mean, it's just, movies and television, they give you such opportunity, and even thinking about what your daughter's going to be able to do, I mean, it's such an opportunity to speak, and when you speak, and hopefully you listen, and when you listen, you learn.
Well, so I want to go back to Melora on a similar topic, but before I do, you talked about Black Panther as breaking it open. It's true. For years, a black superhero movie could never work until it just knocked it out of the park. They said for years that a woman couldn't be a superhero until Wonder Woman proved them wrong. And most recently, Crazy Rich Asians. No way. There hasn't been an all-Asian cast since Joy Luck Club. No way can that work until it did. And, not to mention the gender switched roles for Ghostbusters and Ocean's 11, which involve all-female cast. So I'm curious, from your standpoint, Melora, are you seeing, there's a lot that has to be done. There's a lot more that has to be done. But are you seeing some of these positive changes and opportunities for women? And how, if at all, is it impacting the world? And more specifically, are there things that you've been involved with, like Transparent, for example, that helped educate the world or change attitudes, and really exposing the soft power of American media? What are your thoughts?
I have the unique perspective as being in this business since I was 6 years old. I've been a professional actor since I was 6. And I really think that it shaped me to be in a business where I was constantly surrounded by black people, Hispanic people, gay people, Jewish people, Muslim people, Russians, French. I was exposed at such a young age to a sort of wonderful mishmash of people that make up and have made up the business, that I've really seen this interesting change. And for me, Transparent was a revolution for me as an artist, and for so many people, to be able to have the opportunity to be on set with so many trans people and be able to make friends with trans people and ask questions that I was always curious about but never could ask. And then we were then exposing this set of the culture that had been so stereotyped and had never been explored as just people. And as having the same problems and dramatic arcs as anybody else, and through a wonderful family setting, which happened to be a Jewish family, which also really has never been front and center in a TV show the way that it is on Transparent. So that was so exciting to me to be a part of that, and to I felt a real responsibility to be sort of portraying the character I was portraying with truth and honesty, because even kind of butch lesbians haven't really been portrayed in a way that is, that I think a lot of lesbians have come up to me and said, that they didn't feel that, up until Transparent, that they didn't feel that they'd been represented. You know, I mean, Orange is the New Black, I think, did some good things, really did some good things also in that regard. So I would say that, you know, for me, just individually, I was sort of awakened to this idea that, of course, it's wonderful to do great entertainment, and that's what I've been doing all my life. But it's also really great to do great entertainment that's also doing good in the world. And so I really was looking for the next thing that was going to do good in the world and be great entertainment, which is how the Bold Type kind of came and arrived the way that it did. And I think it is absolutely, the whole show in itself is definitely making an attempt to, in my case, the reason that I was interested in the role is because it's a woman of power who is a real woman. She's not a woman of power who's a bitch and cutting down her employees at every turn and manipulating and has an incredibly horrible, messed up, you know, personal life, but is thriving in work, which is sort of the very two-dimensional way that most women of power have been portrayed. She's a woman who is a woman of power. She's also kind. She's fair. She has integrity. She challenges her young employees. She is tough, but she's fair. And she has a marriage that's working, and she has 2 children, and she has friendships that are working and sometimes not working, and she's a multidimensional, real human. And I've had more women come up to me and say, oh my God, I want to be a boss like Jacqueline, I want a boss like Jacqueline. And so just like African Americans were not portrayed in a way that they could see themselves on television and go, that's me, I want to be that. Well, now there's such a bigger opportunity for that, and I think that's so exciting. Same now for trans people. They can see themselves and go, oh my God, there's me, or someone like me, or my friend. And same for women. Women of power, I think, have been so underrepresented as, you know, if you're a woman of power, then you got to be a bitch, or you got to be a terrible wife or a terrible lover. You can't have both. And that's just, every woman I know is balancing many, many balls in the air and doing it quite well, you know, for the most part. So I think the answer to your question is absolutely things are changing. Absolutely there's tons of room for growth for black people, for Asian people, for Jewish people, for Muslim people, for women, for every, you know, every minority. But at the same time, like, we're doing it. It is happening. And it's happening and it's happening and it's exciting and there's so much opportunity now in today's world to make your own media, and for people to lean into this opportunity to be heard on a global stage, and we are speaking more and more to people around the world, you know, all the time through live streaming and social media things. When people find our shows, it's extraordinary. You know, when I do these little live chats or whatever, I mean, I'm getting questions from France and Yugoslavia, and you know, it's extraordinary to know that these statements that are important to us as individuals absolutely are translating through a world stage. It's very exciting.
I've lived in Connecticut, I've lived in California. So when you're on the East Coast, you know, the fear of the West Coast is earthquakes. When you're on the West Coast, people always ask, you know, is the subway really as bad as I see it in movies? Like, you know, are you gonna get mugged? You know, of course, the stereotypes of you know, from either side. When you're an African American living in Spain, you know, for lack of a better phrase, you are an ambassador. And the same way that you were talking about how, despite the fact that the U.S.'s approval rating went from 11% to 88% when you were over there, but you still had to spend the bulk majority of your 8 years dealing with the ramifications of such negative, you know, feelings about Americans. When I was in Spain in 1988, 89, there were so many negative portrayals of African Americans. Not only was I the first black person that some people were meeting, at the same time, like, the fear you would see in people's eyes wasn't just, I can't even call it racism as much as it was just, they've only have seen some of the most negative portrayals that they had fear, no different than, you know, how people overreact to when they see somebody in ethnic garb. All of a sudden they're afraid because they've seen so many stereotypes of somebody walking into a crowded place and blowing up or something else, just from representation as opposed to media representation as opposed to anything that's real. And so you learn from that. And what I learned from that, I think, thinking back in terms of how having the opportunity to write movies and write television shows, is being able to portray nuance, and then knowing that that nuance now travels around the world. It shows you how images, there's a power in what you portray. And the fact that you can show so many different sides of the human experience, and that people want to experience all these different things from different cultures. And it's just, that was one of the great things about Luke Cage, but it's also really, when I think about SYA, you know, constantly being able to, you know, put people on their toes. And a perfect example is when I first met with Brian Grazer when he was producing the movie Lowriders, and the irony is that Jason Blum was a co-producer on the movie, you know, Jason being an alum. But when I came in to audition, writers are, it's not a different type of audition. You come in and give a pitch of how you see the story. They, from knowing my background in hip hop, because I was a hip hop journalist for many years, and knowing just my background in music, I think they thought coming in that I was gonna give them the Ice Cube Fridays version of a Lowrider story. They were shocked when I came in with a story about Mexican American culture and perspective and being fluent in Spanish. And it was just one of those things that they were just like, I just saw the eyes in the room widen, because they had no idea, seeing me, that I had any other kind of perspective. And so that's one of the things that, having the experience that I've had, is not only do you get to learn all these different ways of viewing the world with opinions that you might agree or disagree with, but being able to hear them for one, and then having the added layer of being able to communicate in different languages, because every language is a culture. And then even within that language, you know, because Mexican Spanish and Mexican culture is different than Spanish, but being able to really differentiate between the two, and from within both cultures, you know, from my experience at Stanford University, it's one of those things that it just gives you so much of an opportunity. And it's, I wouldn't call it a superpower, but what it does is that it gives you the ability to translate your thoughts, or at the very least, better able to communicate what you want to try to accomplish, because you've been on the outside, and you now have I can't call it an inside track, but at the very least, you don't make the mistakes that some people make. For example, of thinking that they can judge somebody's intelligence by their accent. Because having been through the experience of having people hang up the phone on me, or people like just from the simple act of trying to get from one side of town to the other side of town before I was fluent, and knowing that I'm thinking one thing but I'm not able to communicate, and how people are looking at me as if there's something wrong with me, and remembering that, you know, when I'm running into people from different cultures, and understanding that just because you can't speak language yet has nothing to do with your actual intelligence. It's something that I think people take for granted, but something that if you have gone through the experience that I'm hundreds of others, thousands of others at this point have gone through at SYA, it's important, because I think that it gives you, it makes you worldly, and it's something that no matter what you do with your experience, that you don't forget.
Well, listen, Tom, these are incredible stories, and I know I know you asked me to keep this to a very short window, but you also mentioned there might be questions from the audience, so I'll leave it to you to handle.
Why don't we do this? Take a few questions, and then we'll break up, and the party is only beginning, so there'll be a chance for you to have individual conversations with folks here. So are there any questions that people would like to ask? Yes.
I would like you to maybe talk a little bit, I guess all three of you can do this, as to what these new open doors, how they might be inspiring the work that you're doing going forward. Might you be writing a show that is set in Spain or in some other place that just happens to be something that you have an affection for? And do you think that the world has changed enough that we can freely go, like, this is my writing partner. He's not SYA, but he's still a good person. Like we have two pilots. Once he studied in South Africa, I lived in Taiwan, and we have two pilots set, and it's kind of like, wow, we can actually pitch this, I think. So, could you talk a little? That's an eloquent way of saying keep talking and doing what you're doing.
Well, the thing is, since the cancellation of Luke Cage, unfortunately, the fracture of complex politics is the best way I can put it without getting sued. And I've since moved over to Amazon with an overall deal. The thing is that my whole thing about Luke Cage in general was that I always called it inclusively black, meaning that it was something, taking this Marvel character and using it as an opportunity to use it, to give the audience a window into African American culture, African American literature, politics, the music, particularly of Harlem, but doing it in such a way, because I relate everything to music, that it could be like Thriller or Songs in the Key of Life or Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, where yes, it's coming directly from the black experience, but it's done in such a way that without, altering it in any way, the world can understand it. My thing is that I would love to do shows that aren't necessarily from my particular cultural experience, or fish out of water. I think the thing is that, what the Netflixes and Amazons of the world have done is by breaking down all these barriers of the way that people can consume entertainment, that one of the things, perfect example of Netflix, was one of the reasons that we had to finish our show so early was because the post-production process of translating the show accurately into 40 or 50 different languages and subtitles, so that there are Castilian subtitles versus Latin American subtitles versus Mexican subtitles, and also the nuances of the actors, so like Luke Cage is like 40 different voices, so it's crazy. But the thing is that doing that in that way so specifically, and now the way that, I can speak from the Netflix standpoint, that they're actually now in every country putting money into original programming from that country. And particularly when you look at Netflix now, it's like there's so many different shows from all over the place. And depending on what you watch, I've been watching a lot of the Nigerian romantic comedies, and now a lot of dramas. Or there are a couple of there was this show set in Spain called Money Heist, or La Casa de Papel. That was such a cool experience. We actually did a junket in Rome, and I got to meet that cast. I'm fanboy out, and that was really cool. But that's the thing, is that everybody just wants, they don't really care the language, they don't care the culture. In some cases now, they're not even as worried about the cultural background. They just want a good story. And the fact that you have an opportunity, the one thing you can control is the quality of the story you're telling. You're no longer, I think, held back by a lot of the artificial barriers that prevented one from being able to do that. And I think that's really the most encouraging thing, to answer your question.
I have a pretty quick answer to that, to what you were saying. It's just that, I was shocked. I'm working in Canada right now, and was shocked to find out that 36% of Americans hold a passport. Wow. In comparison to 65% of the population of Canada who has their passport. And that's shocking. And so my husband and I are actually developing something that is multicultural because of that very thing. Because we now have an opportunity through media to try to get people that are sitting in the middle of this country that have no interest in having a passport to get familiar with other cultures, other parts of the world that they have these very prejudiced viewpoints about, right? With the wonderful thing you said at the beginning, Charlie, about how it's easy to hate what you don't know. And we have politics in this country that is sort of promoting this idea of hating what you don't know. And I think in this way that is so limiting, and that's not what America's about. We're a melting pot. We're a huge melting pot of all religions and all creeds and all colors and all religions, and that's what makes us great. And so I'm trying very hard in a personal way. We're trying to kind of create something creatively, and And I think that, that so many people in the business are right now just being like, just so lit up by this idea. And we can affect this. We can affect this problem that 36% of our country, our great country, has a passport. We can change that through media.
Just one postscript to that. The good news for the globalization of media for writers like yourself and producers and writers and actors is there are going to be so many more venues in the coming years to display your product. There are more movies made in the Atlanta region than in any place on earth last year because of the Georgian state incentives. But those are now competing not just with California, but competing with New Zealand and Australia and all the European locations. Most of our special effects from our studios at the Motion Picture Association are actually done in Canada because of the Canadian subsidies. So our job at the Motion Picture Association of America, which by the way is neither Motion Pictures nor America, but it's what I inherited. We are content creation, content protection, screen agnostic. You talk about Lagos and Nollywood. You may or may not know that more movies are made in Nollywood than in Bollywood. And of course, Bollywood outpaces Hollywood. But in Nollywood and Bollywood, these things are stolen within minutes of them being put on the air. So the fight that the MPAA is doing, not only to open up markets, create incentives, but also protect the product, is helpful. But on a broader level, the more these countries come online, the more they're going to want our product. And one postscript on that, I was Assistant Secretary of State for Economic Affairs and promoting our business around the world, in this industry in particular. Developing nations and developed nations alike, when they talk about diversification strategies off of oil, for example, in the Gulf, they say, we're going to build a Hollywood. And you know what? It just isn't that easy to do. And it's something that we do really well, and for the time being, in my mind, better than anybody else. But as a result, it's going to open this up for the globe, and it'll help this country as well.
Other questions?
Yes.
My name's Alex. I did Italy 03. This is more of a question for Charles and Cheo, I guess. In your experience with SYA, how would you say media influenced your time in your respective countries? Or if you have any memories of media shaping your experience there?
Well, I mentioned the Sam Jackson story just because that jumps out. But another example would be when I arrived in France, the president at the time was President Sarkozy. And Sarkozy was a little cantankerous, and he didn't like his own ambassadors, not to mention foreign ambassadors. But I did research on him before I came, and I saw that he gave a speech in front of Congress in 2007. And he says what he loves about America are Rita Hayworth, John Wayne, and all the great actors of the 1950s that gave him his inspiration, gave him his view on the world, and made him think positive thoughts about America. So when I arrived in France, I called my cousin's husband, who was running Sony at the time, and I got an unreleased photograph of Rita Hayworth from her days as a Columbia star, framed in an Art Deco frame, and I had it sent to the Élysée Palace before I arrived. And when I was going to give my credentials, he was scowling at all the other ambassadors when he goes, "J'adore cette photo, c'est dans la résidence, j'adore cette photo." And the reason that he loved that picture and put it in his residence is because it inspired him. And so every day, the president of France woke up and saw what he loved about our nation, and it was simply a leave behind from the American ambassador. The power of media abroad is unlike anything you guys can ever appreciate until you live in these countries, as many of you have. But it's something we do really well and have done well for over 100 years.
I think for me, what I'm thinking about is not the reach of media, but when I was there in 1988, the lack of. Because I'll really fully date myself, if I haven't already. There was no internet. There was no iTunes. There was no FaceTime. It was no cell phones. I mean, if maybe Pablo Escobar had one. I mean, it was a time where when we were in Spain, it was funny because there were in our program there were 5 or 6 other African American students, and it was myself. Tony Arthur went to St. Paul's. Saint-Simon, I think, was also St. Paul's. Wanda was Andover. I mean, so the thing was, Earl Bethel was Exeter. We would get these care packages, And like, I just remember getting Jet magazine, and they were always like 2 months old. And really with Jet, it was really about two things. Of course, the center always had like the Jet Beauty of the Week, and then in the back was like a list of all these various pop songs. And I remember Tony Arthur and I there was a song by this woman named Karen White called Superwoman, and we had no way of finding out what the song sounded like. So we sat around for hours trying to make up lyrics for the song and thinking about, okay, what's the song about? And was it like a theme song like Wonder Woman? And so, of course, eventually when we got home, we called each other. We were so disappointed because the song was nothing like we thought it was going to be, But being cut off from hip-hop for this period of time and R&B, it made me fall in love with jazz. It made me fall in love with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, because these were like old jazz records were cheap in terms of like the cassettes. So many of my memories are of having my Walkman and going from my metro stop, which was La Hospital de São Paulo, to La Plaza de Catalunya, and that's when I just learned Charlie Parker. That's when I learned Diz. That's when I learned Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk and so much jazz. And coming back to the States with that knowledge, in addition to just really being ready for whatever new was in hip hop, it was just funny. Like I remember even when I landed, when I left, my cousin gave me 2 tapes. It was EPMD Strictly Business and Big Daddy Kane's Long Live the Kane. But she only half gave me one. She dubbed the other one and gave me, the actual store-bought tape. So she said, pick which one. So I picked EPMD as a store-bought tape. She gave me the dub of Long Live the King. Of course, it broke when I was over there. So when I come back, they were into De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising came out. And of course, me being like, De La Quien? De La Soul? And then I'm like, wait, what's De La Soul? And then all of a sudden, it was like my mind was blown again. But and then it was funny because there was a huge hit in Barcelona, this club hit called Girl, You Know It's True. And we liked it for 20 minutes, and then we're like, this song's corny. There's no way this would ever make it in the States. Get off the plane. It was the first thing playing. It was like this huge global hit. But that's the thing is that, what was fascinating was that was when I kind of also, because they were like, you didn't get the music, but there were break dancers and there were graffiti artists. Like I saw the worldwide impact of hip hop. And it taught me a lesson about how, things that you think are only specific to your culture, when other people are exposed to these things, even if they're not getting the new version of it, they hold on to it and they expand it in their own interpretation. And that, again, is the power of media. And so what's really been fascinating since is like now with the internet and with Netflix and Amazon and all these different things, how quickly something goes around the world. And how it's gone from, in the space of 30 years, being something where as antiquated as waiting for a 4-month-old issue of Jet, to now it's like people experiencing movies and films and records at the same time everywhere. It's just really amazing, the scope and power of media.
What a great way to end. And what I would say this is I'm so proud to have these ambassadors of the media, but these ambassadors for School Year Abroad. So thank you for a wonderful, wonderful program.
Thank you.